surveillance of the Trump campaign very differently. Democrats expected to argue that the court had viable reason to allow spying on Carter Page, a one-time foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. This as Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes has a new request today. He wants to see more of the background on how the court arrived at their decision, as this thing gets more heated by the day. Now, last night, Fox News chief correspondent Ed Henry brought us breaking news that Democratic Senator Mark Warner texted with a lobbyist for a Russian oligarch in an effort to contact Trump dossier author Christopher Steele, and he attempted to do that without initially letting the rest of the members on his committee know about it. Joining me now once again tonight, Ed Henry. Good evening, Ed.
Martha, good to see you. Here we go again. The 5-day window is closing tonight for President Trump to decide whether he's blocking this memo altogether or making some final changes. And we're told late this afternoon he met here at the White House with the FBI director, lawyers from the Justice Department, and from inside the White House counsel's office to go over some of those final redactions. So we expect the release either any moment late tonight or tomorrow from this Democratic memo. What's interesting is the president himself indicated to reporters earlier today that he's not going to block it. Instead, he said he will soon release a letter with what needs to be blacked out, presumably on national security grounds. But a good chunk of this 10-page memo from Democrats is going public. It was put together by Democrat Adam Schiff, largely aimed at pushing back on Republican claims that FBI and Justice Department officials misled that FISA court to start spying on a former Trump advisor, Carter Page, without revealing the FISA application was largely based on the unverified information presented in former British spy Christopher Steele's anti-Trump dossier. But Republican Devin Nunes, as you suggested, is far from backing down from his assertions in the original memo. In fact, today he asked the presiding judge of that secretive court to take the extraordinary step of turning over transcripts from the court. Nunes wrote to the Honorable Rosemary Collyer, quote, "The committee found that the FBI and DOJ failed to disclose the specific political actors paying for uncorroborated information that formed a substantial part of the FISA application, misled the court regarding dissemination of this information, and failed to correct these errors in the subsequent renewals." Now, Nunes is setting a deadline, in fact, of next Friday for the court to turn over those transcripts because he believes those documents will show the Obama administration abused its power. In fact, some Republicans who have seen the Democratic memo say part of it actually is an attack on Nunes, focusing on that instead of actually rebutting the facts in the Republican memo, Martha.
That's interesting. Ed, thank you very much. Ed Henry watching all this unfold with us tonight. Joining me now, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the story. Good to see you tonight.
Good to see you.
Your thoughts on when we might see this? Any idea?
My expectation is that we will see the Democratic memo this evening, and the American people should take note of the different writing styles for these memos. The Republican memo lays out a series of factual conclusions. The Democratic memo is heavily footnoted, but the actual text of the memo largely deals with analysis and editorial opinions. Those very footnotes are likely what the White House is having to redact because some of them cite to specific sources and methods that we use to collect intelligence. So very different memos, very different styles, but in both circumstances, Republicans have been fighting for transparency. Democrats voted against even starting an investigation, and now we'll see what their argument is this evening.
I mean, it seems their strongest point would be if they can undercut the argument that came from the Republican side, which was that the reason that the FISA court signed off on it was based primarily on the dossier. Without that, they wouldn't have been able to do it. Do the Democrats have evidence that is contrary to what your folks put together?
Well, the Republican memo lays out verifiable facts, and you see that Chairman Devin Nunes is still fighting for transparency. The reason Devin Nunes wants to release the FISA application is because the substance of that application will support and buttress all of the claims in the Republican memo, and it will prove many of the claims that Adam Schiff has made are false, and that, in fact, this dossier was the fundamental basis for the warrant to spy on American citizens, and it was not accurate. The information in it was actually planted by Democratic operatives and funded by the Democratic Party.
All right, well, when it comes out, we will see what's in it. In terms of some of the other things that are percolating around this story, because Devin Nunes said himself that there was more to come in terms of revelations about the FISA court and how they work. And one of the people who's getting some increased focus now is Judge Contreras, who was recused from generally you recuse yourself. But in this case, he was recused from the Michael Flynn side of this equation in this case. Do you know anything about that?
I don't, Martha. I have litigated in my private life, and I will say there are many reasons why a judge could be recused from a case that have nothing to do with their prior decisions or rulings on facts which may be relevant. But here, because Judge Contreras did sit on the FISA court, it does raise questions. I've never been critical of the judges who've issued these warrants, though, because to me, they were the victims of fundamental misrepresentations of fact and fundamental omissions of fact that would have and should have resulted in a rejection of this desire to spy on members of the Trump transition team. Instead, because the FBI and the Department of Justice, I think, were so overzealous in their pursuit, we ended up with this terrible deprivation of civil rights, and I think the need for reform.
Excuse me for interrupting. And I asked Congressman Gowdy about this earlier in the week. I do think a lot of Americans watch this whole story, and they do have questions, though. I know you both are reluctant to question the judges, but or perhaps the system by which it is set up. It's a judge. He only hears one side of the argument, right? He doesn't hear, this is why you should allow us to surveil, and this is why you shouldn't allow us, and then he makes his decision, correct?
Correct, Martha, and actually, let me give some credit to Adam Schiff. Back in 2013, Adam Schiff introduced legislation that would have made the FISA process more adversarial, so there'd be a defense lawyer there to make that very argument, and hopefully we'll be able to move past the partisanship of this moment to some bipartisan reforms that would create more protection for Americans in these FISA courts. The reason I don't blame the judge is that they can only rule on the information provided to them, and here, that information was either wrong or there were material omissions that were not included by FBI and the Department of Justice. That's where the focus for reform should be.
All right. We will see where it goes. Congressman Gates, thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
So this week's headlines have seriously muddied the waters when it comes to just who has come under influence by the Russians. And it appears that they were looking to influence really anywhere that they could find any vulnerability. Howard Kurtz is host of Media Buzz, also author of Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth. Howie, good evening. Good to see you tonight. You know, it's interesting. Ed Henry did his report last night on Mark Warner, and there was a bit of circling of the wagons. Marco Rubio came out. I think we have a tweet that Marco Rubio said about this report. It says, Senator Warner fully disclosed. There we go. Fully disclosed this to our committee 4 months ago, has had zero impact on our work. So Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio, is saying that the fact that it was revealed that he was having one-on-one discussions with a lobbyist who was working for this Russian oligarch turned out to be irrelevant to what they're doing. But, you know, when you look at that, you look at the other story this week, Howie, and I realize this is a long question, but I want to lay it out. When you look at the other story this week about Adam Schiff and the pranksters, that he was clearly looking for some dirt on President Trump, then candidate Trump, and you look at the way the Trump side of the equation has been handled, is the press handling all of these things in a fair